filming.
Oh. Hi everyone. We're going to do another one of our brutally honest videos. Today we're going to talk about Magnepan. So, as some of you may know, we've done two, I think, already. So this is in a continual series. So the idea behind the brutally honest videos is that we're going to lay out the good, bad, and ugly. They won't be extremely comprehensive just because there's so much to cover, but I'll hit the highlights. Okay, good. Magnepans represent incredible value for the performance if you like what they do. Of course, speakers are very, very personal and very subjective, so you have to listen and see if you like them. But assuming you like what they do, their natural airiness, openness, transients, total coherence, because all the sound comes from basically the same panel. Big soundstage, deep, quite high, depending on the height of the panel. If you like those kinds of things, microdynamics is superb. If you like those kinds of things, you have to spend literally many times more to get somewhat similar from dynamic speakers. And in some cases, you have to spend even more than that. Those are some of the highlights of the strengths. Part of why they can do that is because Magnepans, if you know what they are, Ellison will throw up some pictures of the speakers. They're basically a panel. There's no enclosure. Basically, think of a frame, and then in the middle of the frame is the transducer, the material that vibrates. And so the panels are maybe an inch thick. That's it. And because there's no enclosure, there's no sound of the enclosure. You can brace and you can make an enclosure that's typically made of MDF quite rigid, but it's still going to have resonance. When you don't have a box, you don't have those resonances. So anyway, those are some of the obvious strengths of Magnepans. And again, listen to it. If you like it, you got to spend a lot of money. I mean, when I say a lot more to replicate somewhat similar strengths that the Magnepan speakers inherently have. The other advantage that they have is that they can be quite close to the sidewalls, and ceiling height doesn't really matter all that much. And the reason for that is that the way that the sound disperses from the speakers, they come out only in the front and the back. There's hardly any sound from the side of the speakers. And one of the ways you can test for yourself is that if you stand beside the speaker, you will hear very little sound. You will hear the sound coming from the front wall in front of you, and you'll hear the sound coming from the back behind you, but almost nothing from the speakers themselves, because again, they don't radiate sound to the sides. So ironically enough, you will see people talking about how Magnepans are tough to set up, you got to get them away from the sidewalls and so on. Far from the truth. They are much easier to set up in a narrow room than a regular cone speaker, because a regular cone speaker disperses its sound in almost a circular fashion. So it's going to hit the sidewalls, it's going to hit the ceiling, it's going to hit the floor. With Magnepans, very little hits the ceiling, very little hits the floor. So much easier to accommodate in a tight room. Wow factor. You get a pair home, and your visitors are going to come to your place and think, oh, those are just regular, Asian, Japanese screens, Chinese screens, They won't believe that it's a speaker, and then they'll come over and put their ear against the speaker. We see this happen all the time. People are just going, where's the sound? And then they go near the speakers and go, wow, that's insane. Very cool. And because they're very unusual in the world of speakers, if you're the kind of person that also enjoys owning something unusual, this is one of those types of things that will give you that wow factor. Okay, and then the other thing, of course, is that because they're extremely unusual, they're also very rare by definition. So again, if you like to stand up. Now let's come to the bad. Magnepan speakers need current in order for them to work as well as they can. What I mean by current is that you need an amplifier that can go into 4 ohms comfortably. It needs to be at least 50 to 100 watts real RMS power. If you like to play your music loud, more power. Okay, they don't have to be necessarily expensive. Parasound amplifiers, even the more affordable ones, work well. Hegel integrated amps from the H120 work well. So they don't need to be very expensive. They just need to be good. And here's the other sort of bad, although it's a good. Although the speakers are not necessarily expensive relative to what they perform, what they do, the better your electronics, the more the speakers shine. And although that's a general truth, these are multiplied because they're so good. So if you use, let's say, a good Hegel amplifier that costs, let's say, $3,000-$4,000, and then you decide you want, you know, some pass labs that are insanely good, you will hear that dramatic improvement through those speakers. Whereas with other cone speakers that cost the same, let's say the Magnepans you're looking at are $3,000, and you buy a cone speaker that costs $3,000. When you go from a Hegel integrated to Pass Labs separate preamp power that might cost you $20,000, you hear an improvement. You will not hear that dramatic improvement that the Maggies will show you. The other bad, the speakers need to be between 4 and 5 feet from the wall behind the speakers, what I'm going to call the front wall. The reason for that is that there's some bass cancellation. Because there's no enclosure, the back of the speaker radiates the sound, hits the wall, then comes back and cancels the front wave. So if you give it 4 to 5 feet from the wall, it takes time for the sound to bounce off the front wall, come out to the front and cancel. And so the cancellation is not as severe as if the speakers were very close to the front wall. The other thing about doing that is that when you have the speakers 4 to 5 feet from the wall, the soundstage depth gets more impressive. But you will need, as I say, about 4 or 5 feet. Having said that, because the speakers are so light and so easy to move, what we tell all of our clients is that if you are in a space-constrained situation, when you want to listen to the speakers, pull them out. You know, put little marks on the floor, or do what we do. You can buy invisible ink markers from Amazon. They're very cheap. And just mark the outline. And then this way, when you want to listen to speakers, just pull them out, put them at the place where you've marked them. And when you don't want to listen to the speakers, you can push them back near the wall, right? So that's one thing to be aware of. Another bad, they can't play as loud as dynamic speakers, floor standing speakers, for example. They just don't. The panels can only move so much. And so if you play them too loud, you will get a bit of a, what we call a slip. The membrane will hit its maximum excursion. Now, they play pretty loud, it's just that they won't play as loud as a dynamic speaker. So if you like to play your music very loud, they may not be the right speakers for you. Another bad, they're not as punchy, as visceral as a cone speaker in the bass. So mid bass, upper bass, low bass, the Magnepans, especially the larger ones, can go quite low. You can measure them, they'll go quite low. They just don't have that same kind of kick you in your gut kind of a bass that a cone speaker can do. So be aware of that. Another bad, taller models like the 1.7, there's a lot of bads. Taller models take up a lot of visual space, because the 1.7s, for example, are basically about my height, about 5'8", 5'9", and they're about maybe 2.5 feet wide. So they look like a block, a monolith, even though they're very, very skinny. But visually, they take up space. So that's another negative. I mentioned microdynamics are superb as a good. Macrodynamics, not as good. What I mean by that is from the softest sounds to the loudest sounds, that contrast is not as good as the dynamic, a pair of dynamic speakers. Magnepans at low volumes can sound relatively lifeless when it comes to that jump, right? The micros are great. Little piano changes, if you will, the key changes. You can hear all that. In fact, they're really good that way. But let's say it goes at low volumes from soft to much louder. At low volumes, they don't do that as well. Now at middle volumes, they start coming alive. right? So just be aware of that. If you listen to your music primarily at low volumes and you still want to hear that big dynamic contrast, Magnepans may not be great for you. Image sharpness is not pinpoint. So if you listen to a regular cone speaker, a well-designed cone speaker, you can get these pinpoint images within the soundstage. Okay, with Magnepans, it's not pinpoint. It's more of an outline, which for me is a good thing. I prefer that because I like what it sounds like in a live situation. If I listen to a guitarist in front of me, that live guitarist has dimension, has width, has height, has a sense of three-dimensionality. With cone speakers, it's more of a pinpoint. And so for me, it's not an issue, but for you, that might be an issue. Another bad, as I said, there's quite a few. With Maggies, the high frequencies are only as they only radiate high frequencies in this dimension, not vertically. So if you stand up, you will lose high frequencies, especially if you are taller than the panel. So if you are looking at, for example, the LRS pluses, the 0.7s, and you stand up, your ear is likely going to be taller than the panel, and you will notice right away that when you stand up, it sounds like the highs have dropped off. Right? So that is a potential negative. Now the taller panels are not an issue. The 3.7s and so on, they're tall speakers, and so for most people that's not an issue. So if you are still considering Maggies in the lower price ranges, one of the things that I mentioned is that if you are likely walking around and so on, and you are about 8 or 9 feet away, doing some work and so on, the highs are still fine. You're doing housework and so on, highs are still fine. But they won't be quite as brilliant, as sharp, as open as when you sit down. That's just nature of the beast. And then finally, bad, the resale value of the larger Maggies, not great. Average to slightly below average. And I believe the reason is because, again, they're physically large, they take up visual real estate, and a lot of people just can't accommodate those speakers. So just be aware, if you want to buy them and then you'd like to sell them at some point, you will lose some money. The LRS pluses and the LRSs are still holding good value because it's an insane value. Same with the 0.7s. But once you get up to the larger ones, it's a bit of a problem. Ugly. Okay. The big ugly would be service. If you ever required service with Maggies, they're expensive, and you need to find a qualified technician to do so. They're not the easiest thing to service because it's basically a grilled sock. You have to take out the side panels, and then the sock has to come off, and then generally speaking, with most of the models, it's because the magnet coils has delaminated from the actual panel itself, and then you have to glue it back. Not a difficult thing to do, but you have to be handy and you have to use the right kind of adhesive. The other thing is that with the larger panels starting from the 3.7 or the 3 series, the old 3 series and up, they use a real ribbon. And if you play the speakers too loud, there's a fuse. But if the fuse doesn't catch it in time, the ribbon will snap and you have to replace the whole ribbon. Now Magnepan does have a good service policy where they'll send you, if you just want to replace the ribbon, you can do that. And if you're handy, you can replace the ribbon. But if you're not handy, they'll send you an entire assembly with the magnets. You unscrew your magnet structure out of your speakers, you replace it with the new one, and you send back the old or the previous magnet assembly back to Magnepan. So they do have that option. I think that's it. So to sum up, despite the fact that it seemed like I had a lot of bad, I was just trying to be as thorough as I could think of. Despite that, it is still my belief that if you like the inherent strengths that the Maggies have, there's literally nothing like it anywhere near its price. So, love to hear your comments. Write them below. If you have owned Magnepans, if you've heard them, what do you think? Share with everybody who watches this video, and we'll see you again next time. Take care. Bye-bye.